Hey everyone, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews. Now on the channel, we've covered a whole bunch of different supports and benefits and programs that have been designed to help people get through the pandemic. But one group that has been largely left out of many of these supports are students and newly graduated students. Now at the beginning of the pandemic, there was the CESB, the student benefit, right? And they paused all payments towards student loans. But as of September, both of those programs ended. But over the past week, there have been some new plans announced from various political parties that propose for a number of different benefits and supports to be applied to students, including a $20,000 loan forgiveness, as well as the potential future abolition of all tuition in general. So in today's video, we'll go over these two announcements, talk about some of the pros and cons of the suggested programs, as well as how they could be potentially rolled out, and how likely it is that this could actually be something in Canada's future. But before we do, make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts and take your wealth into your own hands. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to keep supporting Canadian content like this. And let's face it, there's not quite enough of that on YouTube these days. All right, let's dive in. And we're going to start with Jagmeetsingh of the NDP. Now, he recently held a press conference in which he went over a number of different ideas that are now officially a part of the NDP's platform. I'll show you this video and then we'll break it down into the individual parts and all of the different benefits that he talks about here.
We want a moratorium immediately on student loan payments until the pandemic is over. No payments while students are struggling, and the vast majority of them have lost income and lost jobs. We want to also permanently remove forever, not just in this pandemic, but forever, interest on all federal student loans, which will save at least $3,400 on average for each student. And I'm also very, very proud to announce today that our plan is to give new graduates a 5-year head start without having to repay any of their federal loans, to let them get ahead in their career. So they don't have to choose to find a job that doesn't fit with their vision of their future, that isn't their passion. We want to give a 5-year break so that students can take that time to build themselves up in their career. On top of that, we've long been talking that it's not enough to just help students out with getting rid of the interest. We need to really help out students and graduates by loan forgiveness, debt forgiveness. And so we are proud to announce today that we will, as a new Democrat government, cancel up to $20,000 in federal loan student debt. This is a real concrete way, a bold and ambitious way forward to help students, moving beyond just ending interest payments, which we absolutely need to do, but we need to also forgive loans.
Now, obviously, there's a lot in there, so let's unpack it. It's sort of broken down into 4 different ideas and 4 different plans that they're putting forward. Now, the first one is a pause or a moratorium on all student loan payments until the end of the pandemic. And this might sound familiar because there actually was a program in place like this from March, when the pandemic began, all the way till September. Now, despite NDPs and other student advocacy groups calling out that they should be extended, that program was actually ended in September. So since September, students have been having to pay back their student loans as if it was a typical year. Now, many critics of the Liberal government have come out and said, hey, that's not exactly fair, especially given the data of the jobs. We've seen that people in that younger age group, freshly graduated from school, or the people who are currently in school trying to make some money to pay for their tuition, they've largely been the ones that have been impacted most from the lower jobs number, the higher unemployment rate here in Canada, because many of the jobs that young people do are the ones that are first to go whenever there's any sort of lockdown or any sort of cutback on jobs that are available. So that's interesting that he's trying to bring this back into the mix, a moratorium on all those payments. The second thing that he proposes is that they eliminate all interest on student loans going forward. Now, of course, because this is the federal government, they could only really implement this for the federal portion of student loans. Now, at least when I went to school, and I believe it's the same in many provinces, most of the student loans are actually distributed by provincial organizations. So it could be likely that even if this change were to happen via the NDP pushing this, and if they were to eventually get elected into power, it wouldn't be entirely likely that the mass amount of people's student loans would have this lack of interest, but it at least would help a little bit on the federal side. But there could be some unintended side effects of eliminating this interest, right? Because interest is usually the only incentive for people to actually pay back the loans. Otherwise, you could just hold that debt and never pay it back, and there wouldn't be any penalties, there wouldn't be any interest building up. So if you eliminate interest, will people even pay back the loans at all, or will they just let that debt hang over them because there's no negative consequences of doing so? so. It's something we got to think about. Now, the third thing that the NDP and Jagmeet suggest is that there be a 5-year grace period after you finish your education in which you don't have to pay back your student loan. The idea is that you'd have time to sort of establish yourself in your career before you have to start making those payments. This is the third thing that he's suggesting here in this student plan. And finally, arguably the most controversial but also most progressive idea here is to eliminate up to $20,000 of student debt for everybody who has student debt. Now, of course, there are some issues and some problems here that many critics will bring up. The first one being many people have worked years and years and years to pay off their student loans, and so why is it fair that students who haven't done so are going to have their debt forgiven when they've worked so hard to pay it off? This is one thing that I could foresee many people bringing up in contrast or in opposition to this idea. But previously on the channel, we've discussed some of the positives of a plan like this. It may actually be able to stimulate the economy because it allows for less people to be in debt immediately when they're out of school and in those younger years of their career, when they're actually more likely to innovate, create new businesses, create new things that could build up the Canadian economy. So this is an idea that has pros and cons and many supporters and many detractors. But if this plan for students sounds pretty progressive and pretty aggressive, then just wait until you hear this next press conference. Let's listen in.
And the jobs that students have after the academic year during the summer to help them make their tuition in the fall, make their living expenses in the fall, both of those things disappeared. The student benefit, which students had to really push for to receive in the first place, was only a fraction of the CERB and then the CRB that replaced it, and it ended in August. There are people that should have been in school this fall, that were in school last fall, the previous fall, the fall of 2019, that weren't able to go back. We had said that we wanted to see a suspension of tuition for the 2020-2021 academic year and an extension of benefits for students so that they had a living stipend. We are the only party to call for an end to tuition fees. We are calling for an abolition of post-secondary tuition fees. We are calling for a forgiveness of the student portion of any existing debt held by the federal government.
All right, so some even bigger ideas are pushed here by Annamie Paul, the leader of the Green Party. The first one is she brings up this point that the CESB, the Canada Emergency Student Benefit, well, that ended while the other benefits were actually extended, or more people were able to transition over to things like the CRB. Most cases, students weren't able to do that, so she's calling for this benefit to be extended. But the most progressive idea that she puts forward here is the potential to eliminate all tuition for post-secondary education. Now, this is something that's going to have a lot of debate around it if it were to ever be considered. Now, it may not be immediately obvious, but most of these universities, these post-secondary institutions, they are a big business, and their business is putting students in, having them pay as much tuition as possible, and spitting them out. And if there were to be a change like this where they would cancel all tuition, it's likely there would be some pretty major pushback from these post-secondary institutions, which, let's face it, their main goal is to make money. There are just so many questions about how something like this could be implemented. Would these universities continue to charge tuition, but the federal government would just cover it for people? Or would they have some sort of partnership with the federal government to not charge tuition? It's just not clear how it would work. And parties like this can come out with these large statements and say, this is what we want to do. But like I always say here on the channel, the devil is really in the details. And until we have a more clear plan on how this would actually be rolled out, both for the Green Party as well as the NDP, we can't really make any broad-based judgments on the effectiveness of programs like these. And of course, there's the obvious argument that many people will make is that are we going to subsidize, are we going to pay for people's education no matter which field they choose to go into? Is someone going to get the same funding if they go into music or the arts as they do if they go into engineering? Now, this is a question that many people will ask, and they'll also question the value of these different majors and the potential jobs that they could fill in our Canadian economy. Now, I don't have all the answers about all this, but these are the things we need to think about, the things we need to consider as we push towards something like this, as many people would like to do who are in support of the NDP and the Green Party. But what about the Liberals, the people who are currently in power and would actually have the ability to implement things like these via legislation? Now let's take a look at what they've provided for students since the beginning of the pandemic and what's actually available right now as we speak. Now we've already talked about the programs that existed in the past. Remember, there was that moratorium on payments for student loans, as well as the CESB, the Canada Emergency Student Benefit. So those were certainly things that helped students at the beginning of the pandemic. But as of right now, the only thing that's here to help students is this doubling of Canada Student Grants amount. They said in response to increased need for the coming 2020 to 2021 school year, the maximum amount of Canada Student Grants will be doubled. So that is up to a maximum of $6,000 in grants for post-secondary education for full-time students. Now they're also pushing for a pause on the interest payments on student loans just for the time during the pandemic as of right now, and that's all included inside of Bill C-14, I believe. I have a video on that and where that bill currently is in the legislative process. Currently it's sort of finished its committee phase and it needs to be sent back for third reading, but I go into way more detail in the video, so you can check that out in the description. But all around, the Liberal government simply isn't suggesting that they're going to provide the kind of support that the Green Party and the NDP are suggesting. Now, of course, the NDP and the Green Party don't have as much political sway in the House of Commons as they would like to, but it is important to note that when policies like this come from these smaller parties, it sort of puts pressure on these larger parties to implement something like the suggestions that the NDP are pushing for, the Green Party are pushing for. We saw that in the when they were drafting legislation for the CRB, the NDP was really pushing to have sick pay included in this, and as a result, the Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit was created because of the pressure that these smaller parties put on the Liberal government. But whether or not this pressure from these smaller political parties will actually make the Liberals do anything, that we don't know. But we do have a day on which we're going to find out what the Liberals' plan is going forward. That's April 19th. That's the day that the Liberals are going to put forward the first federal budget in over 2 years. Now, this is the document that shows everything the Liberals are going to spend their money on going forward, their plan for Canada's future. And I'm going to be covering that right here on the channel, so subscribe if you haven't already done so. And we're actually going to have a live stream on that day as they announce this federal budget, so mark your calendars for that too. But going forward, as it seems more and more likely that we're going to see a federal election this spring, let's take a look at how these young Canadians are actually planning on voting in accordance to this poll that I'm about to show you. Let's take a look. So this article is as of March 23rd, but it says that out of those aged 18 to 34 who were polled, the Liberals and the NDP each received 29% support, according to the Main Street Research poll conducted last month, and 1 in 5 younger voted supported the Conservatives. Interesting that they go 1 in 5 here. That's 20%. I don't know why they didn't list that as a percentage like they did for the other parties. So 20% for the Conservatives, roughly 30% for both the Liberals and the NDP, and here we see 10% backed the Greens and 4% preferred the Bloc Québécois. So that could answer how these groups of voters are actually planning on voting as we potentially go into this next election. Now, of course, this could change as various parties come out with their different platforms as we get closer and closer to this election. And if the pressure from these smaller political parties right here in Canada isn't enough, there's also some pressure being put on the Canadian government by the actions of our counterparts south of the border. Let me show you this. So this is a recent headline from Forbes, and of course, this is something that Biden campaigned on, potentially canceling student loan debt, and now he's looking at doing that for up to $50,000. Now, there are some roadblocks that he has to get by. He actually wants this to be passed through the Senate as opposed to passed via executive order, but it is more and more likely that there's more and more support for this in the States, and as a result, those ideas could trickle up north to us. But of course, like I said, we're not going to know what the Liberals' plan is until they release that budget on April 19th. But this could be a potential place where the Liberal government could falter, especially going forward. Now, it seems we're in the era where there's constant handouts, constant different benefits being handed out to people throughout the pandemic, through the CRB, the expansions to the EI program, the CERB initially, and largely students have been left out of that. Now, that could result in some rather negative opinions of the Liberal government from these young voters. So moving forward, this could be a potential place where the Liberal government could make a mistake in terms of their party's future. But of course, this is a pretty complex issue, and I've likely missed some things here, and I'm really curious as to what you have to say about all of this. Let me know down in the comments. I read every single one, and I try to reply to as many as I possibly can. So let me know what you think about all of this. Do you think it's a good idea, or is it not exactly fair for the people who paid off of their student loans without any sort of support? Or is this a good idea going forward. Either way, no matter which way you think about it, let me know down in the comments. And make sure to check out the links in the description where you can open up your own investment accounts. Now, these days we see all these government supports helping people out with their finances, but the only thing you can truly depend on when it comes to your financial future is yourself. So I'd really recommend opening up accounts like that and learning about personal finance and investing. And if you haven't already done so, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell to keep supporting Canadian content just like this. And with all of that said, thank you so much for watching, everybody. I really hope this video has helped you out at least a little bit, and I'll see you next time. This channel is supported by viewers like you. Thanks, channel members.